Hello class. This afternoon I'm going to demonstrate constructing the shadows for the final shaded plan oblique. I'm going to use the simple gathering space that I've been using in the PowerPoints throughout this project. The first step is to get a clean finished drawing of your community gathering space in plan oblique, including the path and the entry element. I know the image is quite light, but you want this line work to be as light as possible. You should be even lighter than mine is. It should just be visible. As with so many of our tone drawings, we want this drawing to read entirely from its tones, and the lines will hopefully disappear once we have all of our tones in place. The first thing I'm going to do is put a layer of flimsy over my drawing so that I can construct my shadows on that surface and keep my drawing clean. I'm ready to begin my drawing. I have my tracing paper flimsy taped over my drawing. I know it makes it hard for you to see, but I'll darken the lines as I go along. I have the triangles that I'm going to need. In this case, I'm going to need my 30-60 triangle to draw the elements themselves and shadows that are parallel to those edges. And I also will need my 45-degree triangle to draw the altitude so that I can get the length of my shadows. Right? So it's going to be the same process that we used in Barcelona. In this case, though, my shadows are going to be cast to the left side of my drawing. In this case, the baseline, my 30-degree angle, is on the south, so this will be towards the west. This will give me afternoon shadows. Remember, I know that from, think back to the PowerPoint and the way my darker surfaces were laid out. They're on the left side, so that's the direction my shadows are going to be going in. Okay? So I'm going to begin with a simple element. In this case, I have a column right here, and vertical elements are easy to work with. I'm going to start with the line that I see. Now, if you remember back to Barcelona, we talked about shade lines, right? Those are the lines that are an edge between a lit surface and a shaded surface. And going back to my diagram, this left side of the column is a shaded surface, or darker shaded surface. In this case, the right side is a lighter shaded surface. So for this exercise, that is a shade line. I don't have truly purely lit surfaces except for my horizontal surfaces. So it will be the line between my darker surface and my lighter surface will be my shade lines. Okay. Now, the shadow of a vertical line, going back to Barcelona, I know that it is horizontal when it is on the horizontal surface. All right, so that's the actual line of the shadow. I know it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to darken it up in a minute. I use the 45-degree triangle to get the length of my shadow. So the 45 is never going to be an edge of a shadow. It's never going to be a real line. I only use it to measure. So I'm just going to make a tick mark to give its basic location. Now, part of the reason I didn't darken the whole line is it goes across a negative volume. So I'm only going to darken the line where it is on that level. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the line that is hidden. Remember, in my shade lines, I'm always working with pairs. So I have this edge that is a shade line, and that means that back corner is also a shade line. I don't want to do a whole lot with that line because it's not really part of my drawing, so I'm going to draw it very lightly. What I really need is to find where it hits the ground. I'm going to need to use my 60-degree angle to find that point And then I can take that intersection across my surfaces also. And then making sure I come from the right point, get where that ends. Right? So now I have a few good points here and here, and a few good lines. Okay. Now, when I look at this, I have the shadow of my front vertical, I have the shadow of my back vertical. If I go back to remembering my process with shade lines, I know that it's a continuous shape, and so it goes up the column, then it goes across between the lit top surface and the shaded side surface, and then back again between the lit top surface and shaded side surface to the line that goes down to the ground. So I want to draw the shadow of these two horizontal lines. I know where each of them starts because they start where the lines that I've already drawn end. I know that because this line is a horizontal line and it is casting a shadow onto a horizontal surface, its shadow will be parallel to the line. So in this case, it will be a 60-degree angle. The same is true for this line. It's a horizontal line casting a shadow onto a horizontal surface, so its shadow will be parallel to the line, in this case, a 30-degree angle. So I can come from those points that I have and draw the angles and see where they intersect. And I'll get just a little bit of a point. And so I know it's with my colored pencil I lose some precision here, but I should always have a shape like that. So you see how it has that corner. A three-dimensional object is always going to have that extra corner. I've gone ahead and added the shadow constructions for the other two columns. The little one is simple. It's very short. It all lands on the right side of my negative volume. The middle one, though, is a problem. The shadow ends somewhere in the negative volume, not on this upper surface. So I have to construct the shadow in that area to see where the end of the shadow will be. There are a number of different ways to translate from this upper surface to the lower surface at the bottom of the negative volume. One way is to bring it down the vertical surface and then across, and that's what I'm going to do. It's a convenient way to work because I have that vertical surface visible to me. So I see where the shadow across the ground intersects that vertical plane, the right side of the negative volume, and I just draw the vertical line. If you want to think about what we're doing, the shadow isn't cast on that side, but if this was a plane that was facing the other way, the shadow would be vertical on the right side of that plane, so the geometry is consistent. Then I'm down to a horizontal surface, so my same geometry applies, that it would be a horizontal line. And I can take those lines across there and now see if my 45 intersects it. And what I see is it does not. So what that's telling me is that shadow finishes up someplace outside the edge of my drawing. It doesn't matter where. It will exist here. Now, I may or may not see it because this whole plane is also going to be, this is going to be a shaded surface, and it is going to cast a shadow across the bottom. I don't know how long that shadow is going to be. I'm going to look at that next, and that may cover up all of this shadow from the column. So this part I will never see, right, because that's on a shaded surface. This part I may see part of if it extends beyond the shadow that this plane is casting. All right, so I'm going to construct some more, and I'll show you what it looks like and talk you through it as after I get a little more drawn. All right, so I've taken a vertical line at a convenient location to analyze the shadows that this shaded side of this negative volume will cast into the volume itself. Just any convenient location. This is away from other things. Drew the vertical, took its horizontal across the ground, and then came with the 45 down from above. And what I see is they intersect over here past outside of my shape. Right, so that tells me that this entire shape is going to be in shadow. I'm going to have the shaded surface and then the cast shadow. It's not going to change where I have the column. It's just going to be a shaded surface and then a cast shadow. But I have taken that line where it would be and found where it intersects with the bottom of this plane, because I am going to get some more complicated shadow over here, and I'm going to have to develop that a little bit later because it's also going to involve this wall plane. The wall I've done the basic shadow from. In all of these, you want to use as few construction lines as possible. So I've come from the shade line of my wall. I know if this is the shade line of a column, that same edge is going to be a shade line for my other elements. So I've come across the ground plane, come down from the top with the 45, and just made the tick mark, not drawn the line. Then I know I'm going to have a little shadow from this 30-degree or 60-degree angle. So I drew a 60-degree line here, came down with the 45 from that point, and then came back with the 30-degree line for that top edge of the wall. And then it hides behind the wall. So that simplifies a lot of things for me. I don't have to worry about the other end of the wall. I also don't think I have to worry about the roof where it overhangs the wall. We'll see when we get a little further along, but I'm pretty confident that's not going to have any impact on my drawing. Okay, so again, I'm going to do a little more work here, and then I will show you what I've done. All right, so I've resolved the shadows for the rest of that negative volume, and also the shadows that are going to be generated by both the wall and the bench. Now, one of the things with shadows is I don't know what is going to be the defining line until I solve the geometry. So for the issue with the trench, I thought that the shadow on this plane here was going to be cast by this horizontal edge. And so I saw where that edge would intersect the plane, and then where that edge would intersect the plane again, and I get this line. Now remember, this is the way we generated the shadows for the top part of the window frames on walls, things like that. Right? But as I did that, I thought that this edge, this front edge of the wall, might come into play as well. And so I drew the shadow that would cast onto this surface. Right? And so I would come across. Now that then is the shadow of the vertical line on a vertical plane, so its shadow is going to be a vertical line. And what you see is that we get a really complex shape as those two shadows intersect with each other. I'm going to darken it in just so you can see it. Right, so I have the rectangle is the shadow that this wall is casting onto that surface, and then I get a little bit of diagonal that's from this edge. Now, that's pretty high-level constructed shadows. I don't really expect you to catch something like that, but I do expect you to recognize that something's probably going on here and give it a best guess. I absolutely expect you to recognize that a freestanding column is a three-dimensional volume, and so it's going to have that extra corner on the point, and that the shadow would be in a different location on an upper surface and a lower surface if it wasn't hidden by something else. Okay. I'm also here to help you and fully expect that you're going to run into areas that you're not sure what to do. So reach out to me so that we can sit down and review your process, and I can help you solve your shadows. All right, so now I came over here to look at the shadows of the wall and this kind of bench element with its two different levels. So first I looked at where the shadow of the wall would land, and I found that if I brought the corner of the wall down to the ground, I bring it all the way down to the ground, brought it across the ground, used my 45 to find where it ended, this line was the shadow of this horizontal edge. This line is the shadow of the vertical edge. Mm-hmm. I looked then at the shadow that the wall would cast on the bench, and I have this horizontal line would be the shadow of the vertical on the bench, and I see it ends somewhere off the bench. So that's telling me the entire lower surface of the bench is in shadow. The bench itself is also going to cast a shadow on the ground. It's going to go horizontal, measure down the 45, then pick up this line, and so the shadow that's being cast on the ground so far is something like that. It starts from the bench, and then the wall comes in, pops up a little bit, and continues along. Right. Now, I'm going to look at what's happening with the shadow on this upper level. And to do that, what I did was I extended that line to my wall, the vertical that I've been working with, and just brought the horizontal across and found if that higher surface came all the way over here, the shadow of that low wall onto that upper surface would be right here. When I bring that back to that element, I see that line is here. It's not quite out at the edge of that higher level. All right. So that also tells me that in terms of the shadow on the ground, it's now going to be the front edge of the bench, or whatever this is, that shapes that shadow. So I brought that down to the ground, came across, found where it ended, and then came back, found where it ended, and turned the corner again. Now, I'm not darkening these in. There's going to be more going on from this roof element, and I'm going to get that drawn and get that resolved as well. I also need to resolve the shadow on this end plane. Okay, so to draw the shadow of the roof, we're going to do it in a couple of steps. But the first thing I'm going to work with is the area that I can see, this front edge. I need to identify what my shade lines are. I know that the top surface is lit. Because my light is coming from this direction, this surface is lit as well. So that means that this line is not a shade line. This one must be because the bottom surface is not lit. If my light is coming this way, since my shadows are cast to the left, then this surface is not lit. So then this line is a shade line. So these three red lines, the shadows of those lines are what are going to create the shadow of my roof. Now this one obviously extends to the end of the plane, but I just illustrated it here. All right, so to draw the shadow of those lines, I'm casting the shadow on the ground, so I need to get them down to the ground, and that's a little bit complicated. I can draw the vertical. If I know the height, I could measure the vertical, but in this case, I did it graphically. I used this wall that is supporting the roof and saw where those two planes intersected, took the vertical down the wall and across the ground to see where it would intersect. So now I have that point on the ground. And now I can draw the shadow just as I have with all of my others. I take the shadow of what in this case is mostly an imaginary vertical line because I want to get the shadow of this little bit. I'm going to take that across the ground and then come with my 45 down from the top, and I get 2 points on that line. Right? And it happens to land almost exactly on top of the shadow of my column. Don't worry about it, means nothing. That will happen occasionally. Right? So this little section between those 2 points is the shadow of this short vertical on the edge of the roof. That long horizontal that's on the 60-degree angle starts at that point. So I can come from this point with a line on a 60-degree angle. It's going to stop when it hits the wall. That's only the shadow of this surface on a horizontal surface. Again, this is our rule of parallels. Horizontal line, horizontal surface, the shadow will be parallel. I have the same situation with my other section of roof where it's going to cast a shadow on the ground. From this point, it's on the 30-degree angle. Its shadow is going to be on the 30-degree angle. And then I find where it ends by coming with the 45, and I see that it ends right over there, not quite joining in with the shadow of this element. Okay. So now I'm going to do some more. I'm going to complete the shadow of the rest of the roof and the shadow of the roof on the wall over here as well. All right, we're getting close to done. So I completed the roof on the ground plane, and its shape is these 4 lines, right? And just like my column, it has that extra corner because I'm moving from the bottom surface to the top surface. Then I have the shadow that the roof element is going to cast on this wall. Right? Now, here I've got the shadow of a horizontal line on a vertical plane, so none of my rules apply. I simply have to find 2 points that are on that surface. So I have 1 point for each of the edges. I'm going to have the top edge on this side of the roof and the bottom edge, the hidden edge, from the other side of the roof. And I have a point for each of them. If my wall was a little taller, it would intersect the roof. Right? So I can draw the imaginary line that shows where the wall and the edge of the roof that I'm drawing the shadow of would meet. That would be another point, because remember, if the object casting the shadow touches the surface the shadow is on, that point of where they meet is, where you can see it better, there we go. That point where they meet is also a point of my shadow. So now I have 2 points. I can connect them. I know it's a single line because this is a single line. This is a single surface. And so that line then would be the shadow that the roof casts on the wall. This one, because that edge that is casting the shadow is parallel to this edge that is casting the shadow, and it's on the same surface, the shadow will be parallel. So if I have an adjustable triangle, I can simply draw the parallel line. If I don't, I can do the same process. In this case, I took the line of my wall through, saw where it intersected the bottom edge of the roof. Right, so again, that idea of the line casting the shadow, intersecting the surface the shadow is on, and then connected those dots and got that stripe across the roof, or across the wall, the shadow of the roof. Now, you see the dimension changes, and that's what typically happens. I also completed the shadow of this wall on the ground. I had to find a hidden edge. Now, what you can't see in this drawing is that there's a column on the end of the wall to support the roof. Right, so I know the column continues the end of the wall, so when I found the shadow on the ground, I could continue that line across, and it's going to reach the roof, so I don't have to worry about it. Now this other side of it, right, I don't have that column drawn. I've never drawn it. It's always been hidden. But I know that that column that's hidden there is the same size as these freestanding columns. So the shadow it casts is going to be the same width as the shadow these cast. So I measured the dimension between these two lines and then just measured that dimension here. And so that gave me the other side of the shadow. I know it's going to go from the top of the wall to the bottom of the roof. It has to, and I don't have to worry about any more complicated geometry than that. Right? So the only thing I have left to work with now is the shadow of my entry element on the ground, and I'm going to use that to test whether I'm going to see the end of the roof on the ground. All right. So in a similar manner to the way I dressed the roof, I brought the line of the beam down to the ground, found the shadow that it would cast across by going across the ground and then coming down. I have the same surfaces that are going to be important. This is going to be a shade line. This is going to be a shade line. This is going to be a shade line. And then that hidden bottom edge is going to be a shade line as well. So I found that this top edge was underneath the roof. That wasn't going to matter. But when I looked at the bottom edge, I found it just barely scrapes the edge of the roof. And so this is going to be a tiny little 30-degree angle parallel to this line till it reaches the roof, found where the other end was, and then that's going to be a horizontal because it's going to move up on my other shape. If it wasn't all under the roof, this then would be a shade line as well. So I have a hidden little vertical in there, but these are tiny, tiny lines. This one is horizontal. This one is 30 degrees. Now, actually, I'm glad that I have that little bit because it's going to help the edge of the roof read really well when I put my tone on. Seeing that, though, it made me suspect that this roof was going to cast a bit of a visible shadow. And so I came back over here to where I was working before and said, well, if the wall wasn't here, that shadow would continue across the ground. Right? That's a horizontal surface, horizontal surface. This is drawn at a 60-degree angle. I just continue my 60-degree angle across, come down with the 45, and see that that point ends right over there. And then that is the beginning of this line, which is on the 30-degree angle. And so I get a little more complicated shape there, but really all quite manageable. Now, right now I've got a mess. I have a lot of construction lines. I have things that I don't really need, which is why I did it all on flimsy. I'm going to transfer this to my good drawing paper just using tone to darken in the shadows and the shaded surfaces. So my south facing surfaces will be a light gray, my west facing surfaces will be a medium gray, my cast shadows will be virtually black or very, very dark gray. Right? And I'm going to go through that process and show you what my finished drawing will look like. All right, so now you can see the finished drawing with the three values, the three tonal values. I have the light gray on the south-facing surfaces, the medium gray on the west-facing surfaces, and then the cast shadows are the darkest tone. Okay? And even though some edges are barely defined by lines, we still understand the forms clearly because of our ability to put those shadows and shapes together and create three-dimensional volumes. And it creates a very effective drawing that's very nice in your portfolio. Okay, so there you go. That's the whole process, and I hope that was helpful.